In the area of activities of the DBAM and the Museums Directorate is doing, together with international organizations, with other countries, with our peers in other countries of the world, it is that we have this activity today involving Denmark. As you probably know through the press, this comes together with a special visit of the princesses of Denmark. They already arrived Saturday, Sunday to our country. And with our organization, DBAM, there will be a number of activities and opening in the Museum of Bellas Artes, and an agreement of cooperation between the Danish Agency for Culture and the DBAM to be able to establish an exchange of professionals and experiences in the area of museums. Another international area that will be very important for everybody. So this agreement will be signed on Wednesday with the princesses. So this conference, this presentation given by Ole is going to be telling us about, or placing us in the context of the cultural organizations and museums in Denmark, and later on the work that will be done in this area. There was special interest in the development of educational projects. There is a very interesting experience that has been done in Denmark related to this area. The impact assessment of the educational aspect in museums, and much needs to be done by us. So undoubtedly what we will be hearing today here will be very important for everybody. Ole Winther is the head of cultural organizations. They consider libraries, museums, and zoos of the Danish Agency of Culture, and it is dependent of the Ministry of Culture. And by thanking you all here for being here today, I would like to leave the floor to him so that he can tell us about the experience of the museums in Denmark.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for seeing me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and as Alan said, I'm sort of a substitute for one of my employees, Ida, who unfortunately couldn't make it. So you have to deal with me, and I hope that's okay. This is a map of the world. This is the way I've been traveling to get here. See, that's more or less across on the other side of the world. And as Alan said, I would try to give you an impression on how museums work in Denmark, and especially on how we deal with education and dissemination, and how we try to be very focused on developing that, because we think that museums have a very strong role in society as builders of a common society. And we have tools that other parts of society doesn't have. So that's why we believe very strongly in the educational role of museums. The challenge, I would say, I would like to talk about is not only Danish. I think we have experienced a global change in the use of culture in the last years, a change that at the same time connects us and separates us. And I think that the world is changing ever faster than it's been before, and at the same time we've never had so many more things in common. And I'm just taking this is the thing in the world that connects us, living everywhere all over the world. We all share Facebook as the common communication thing. And another thing that we also share is Psy, I think he's called, with his Gangnam Style. And I just read in one of the Danish newspapers that his video has been seen 1 billion times at YouTube. It's amazing how he can reach so many people all over the world, no matter where you live and who you are. So even though we live across the world, we have so many things in common due to the internet. And I think it's very important that we stay focused on that. the things we have in common and not what separates us. And that's why it's also so great for me to be here, because then we can get another strong connection between two parts of the world. This is Denmark. This is what I call the measle map. It shows, the red dots shows the museums, or what used to be the museum. There are 160 some dots there, and now we have 107 museums, 7 state museums that I have not listed, and 100 state subsidized museums. That means the state and the municipalities, they co-fund the museums. And that's the 107 museums I'm responsible for. They get tax money, and they have to work within the Museums Act. So just like here in Chile, they have to research, educate, register, and collect and contain whatever, just as you do here in Chile. The numbers I've put in, in the paragraphs are the number of visitors, the percentage of visitors the museums have. So as you can see, most visitors come to the cultural history museums, not so many to the art galleries, and with only 5 natural history museums, of course, we have the fewest visitors there. I will send my presentation to Magdalena or Alan afterwards, so you can have it for them, or they can put it on the website, so just so you know. But this is Denmark, and as you see, this is a small country, and we see the capital at the far east. Denmark used to rule all the Nordic countries. That's why our capital is there, so we could get free access to Sweden and Norway, which we were once kings of as well. If you look Denmark up at Wikipedia, for instance, that's what I did when I came here. What can I learn about Chile and Santiago in 2 minutes? So I tried Wikipedia, and if you do the same on Denmark, I was pressed on time Friday morning when I found out I was going here. You will know that Denmark is one of the happiest countries in the world. And it's also one of the most peaceful countries, just next to New Zealand. And we are a very rich country, one of the best countries in the world for businesses, Forbes magazine said. I think the financial crisis has hit Denmark harder than it hits Chile, so because the business climate is not as good as it could be, but still we are a very rich country with a very high tax percentage every year, and a lot of things get paid through our taxes, so we don't have to pay for schools, colleges or universities or anything. You don't have to pay to get to hospitals and to get specialized treatment because we pay taxes. So Denmark is a very strong community, a very strong country. And we are also sort of monocultural. Only 9% of all the 5.5 million Danes are from everywhere else. So we are just like one large family. We all know each other, more or less. And being fewer people than live in Santiago, you surely can get a picture of how we know each other, all of us. But this is Denmark, and these are all the museums. As you can see on the map, the lines show the municipalities, and more or less every municipality has a state museum, which I'm responsible of. So we try to use the museum as cultural builders all over the country. And it's very important for us that even on the west coast of Denmark, where not so many people live because the climate is very harsh, we still have museums, even though they don't have so many visitors, because this is part of being a Dane, this is part of being a part of Danish society. You have to have the same possibilities as if you lived in the capital. So that's a very important policy for us to have museums and theaters and libraries and zoos all over the world, and all over the country. What we have experienced in Denmark is some structural trends, and as I understood on Alan and Magdalena, you don't have that many museums. You have a lot of private museums, but not that many state or funded or subsidized museums. But just a few years ago, we had almost 200 state museums in Denmark, and we have been working with them to get mergers. So now we have stronger and larger museums through mergers, and them being stronger, they also develop a new role in society, and that's what I'm going to get back to later on. Because now they are suddenly the biggest cultural player in many parts of Denmark. And then we also had a public debate on sustainability. How few museums can we have, as one of the politicians said, because he wanted to use the money for hospitals instead. So that's raised a public debate in Denmark. How little culture can we need, or can we have, to say we are sustainable cultural-wise? Then we have very strong partnerships on teaching and research, because we have found out that the students who have difficulties in the normal schools, they get another way of learning things by doing that in museums. So that we think museums are new learning spaces that can help the disabled or the disadvantaged students in so many ways. Most important is that also the focus within the museum has changed. Just a few years ago, museums were about something. We had the museum for maritime things, and we have the decorative arts museums, and we have art galleries. Now in Denmark, museums are for someone and not something. And I think that's a very important shift you have, because you are here to tell a story, you're here to educate people, you're here to develop society, and that's the most important thing you can do. Not say, I have so many stone axes in my collection. If you cannot activate the stone axes or the prehistoric things, then you don't get a voice in society and people don't care about you. So that's why it's so important that museums are for someone and not about something. I think it's also very important to remember that there will never be two identical museums. Every museum is positioned or placed in a certain area. They have a certain audience, a certain group of users, and every museum has to look at who are coming to my museum and how can I activate those, how can I make them happy, how can I satisfy them when they come to my museum. And I think it's important that we are aware of our different positions and we use those differences to make ourselves stronger and to connect each other and say, I'm good at this and you're good at that, shouldn't we work together? And then we'll stay much stronger for less money than we would if we tried to do everything ourselves. That also goes with sort of a paradigmatic shift we have had in society, and that's a global shift. I think most of the industrialized countries are more and more concerned about the cost prices. And for instance, I've just read in the newspaper, a lot of the heavy industries are now moving from China or Asia to Africa because it's cheaper to get labor there. So we are more concerned about the cost prices. At the same time, we are trying in the industrialized countries as Chile and Denmark, we're concerned about lifelong learning because now we use people for their brains and not for their hands. And that gives a global change in how we think. Because now all institutions in our countries, they have to develop people. They have to offer lifelong learning so people are happy and they are taught something new every day, so they are, sort of on top of things and they can work at the knowledge society that is asked for. And for museums, I think the purpose for us these years is to strengthen our professional development, to focus on the educational role of museums as in a rapidly changing society. And that change demands a lot of changes for us as museum professionals. We have to adopt more professional skills than we had to have before. We have to deal with a lot of new things. Not only because of the new technology, but because people, in Europe for instance, it's so cheap to travel. So when people in Copenhagen say, what should we do this weekend? Should we go to another city in Denmark to see a display or an exhibit? No, let's go to Rome, let's go to London, let's go to Paris. And that gives a so different competition between the museums. So being a small museum in the outskirts of Denmark, you have to be so professional that you really can't imagine, because people that just come from Louvre and then they want to see your stone axe the next day. And it's so unleveled, that competition, and it takes so much of us to be there. And that's why we tried in 2006 to focus on education and dissemination. We spent a year making this national strategy to develop the educational role of museums in society. In 2006 and 2007, our parliament, they made some annual grants for this specific part of museum work, and we get $5 million a year to provide free entrance for children and young people under 18 at all museums, and we get $6 million a year to develop the dissemination at the museum. So that's project money the museums get beside the annual funding from the state, which they can apply for. This is a part of a series of what we in Denmark call white books. That's papers we do to help the politicians make some decisions, and so we've made that in all the different fields in museum work. So this is just the one for education and dissemination. And as you see, we get $11 million a year, and that's quite a lot of money, also in Denmark, beside the annual funding. With that money, we made some action points. We decided to have user surveys, and I'll get back to that. And we did a lot of different programs. So you could help. You could say that the strategy falls in two parts: the didactic and educational development of and at the museums, with the 4 dots there: surveys, network of museum education, seminars, and founding courses. We spend a lot of money for training the museum staff. We use a lot of money there, so the professionals, they are true professionals and can work as such. And I'll present some of the parts I'll take it as I've shown it here, first the didactic part and then the user surveys. And Denmark is the first country in the world that has made user surveys on all museums, and that's mandatory. No museum can say, no, we don't want to be part of that. Then I'll go and look at them and say, you have to do it. So that means we've got a unique statistics on what our museum users are and what they want. And this has been a very strong medicine or cure for the Danish museums, because they've really taken the project to them, and they have developed so many ideas on how to use and get new user groups into the museums. First of all, we made a national survey just to find out where are we, what's our starting point. So we made a survey by making I interviewed a lot of museum directors, and then we made a digital survey and say, what do you have now? Which courses do you have? How do you address the education questions at your museum? So we got a lot of answers, and we made a report on that, and it's only in English, but you can find it at our webpage. And it's called The Learning Potentials in Museums and then Good Practice, because it's the good examples on how you can do it. And the target group for the survey and for our program are the museums, of course, but this is also the educational institutions and also the decision makers, because even though we get $11 million a year, we need a lot of more money, because it's very expensive to keep developing new programs. Then one of the ministers of culture also decided to name 10 specific museums that are excellent in development of dissemination. So they get a special grant every year. So they've got another task, so to speak. They have to develop. They have to be first movers in developing dissemination. And it's not the 10 largest museums. It's 2 very large museums and 8 very small museums. Because we found out in the small societies, museums, their voice is much stronger than museums are in Copenhagen, because in a small society on the West Coast, that's the one cultural institution, so that's where people go. When there's a meeting like this, you would have it in a museum because they have the hall. So the museums play a completely different role in the small societies than they do in the large ones. We have, right now, I just calculated this weekend, we have 350 projects running right now. Some of them are PhD programs, and some of them are focused on one museum or a few museums, because one thing that is mandatory for the museums when they apply, they have to work together. So no single museum get an allowance from me. They have to be at least 2 museums, because we have to work together. And if they work together with a university or educational institutions, they get more money, and if they even work international, they get even more money. So we try to trick them to say, if you do this, then you get even more money. And it really works. Most of our projects now, they have 4 or 5 museums together. So, and that's very good, the way they support each other. It's also, I have to say, very difficult, because it might people you really don't know. But bringing them together for a specific project makes the network in Denmark so much stronger, because now we know each other really. We know when someone is annoying and what someone can do and someone can't do. So we really get to know each other that way. And that gives us a stronger museum society than we have seen before. We also found out what we needed in Denmark was a national network of museum education. We found out that the cooperation between the educational system and the museums wasn't very strong, and we just sort of jumped from one little hill to another, and we didn't have the highway going there. So we founded 3 regional centers in Denmark, one in the west, one in the middle, and one in Copenhagen, where museums and educational institutions, where schools get together and develop what we need for small children, the children in the middle part of grammar school, and young people. So we are focused. In Denmark, all the schools, they have certain goals that the Ministry of Education say, if you are in the 4th grade, you have to, when you leave 4th grade, you should be doing this, this, and this as a student. And the museums, they measure themselves up to that. So if you have to learn about the medieval times in 4th grade in history, then the museum will develop courses in medieval history and exhibits that meet the school demands there. And as I said before, we also found out that some of the students or pupils who have difficulties in going into a normal school and sitting in a classroom, they learn so much more when they go to a museum or try to get taught in another environment than they used to. And we have some projects where we can see that their grades have risen. They get better grades after being taught at the museum, just because they're not, sit at all the benches. So that's very good that we have these evidence. We can prove that it's good for students to go to a museum and get taught. And then we've made 2 partnerships as well. One is called Learning Museum, that focuses on the young students. And then where we have 50 schools and 50 museums that are going, they have made partnerships one-to-one, and they have to develop programs for each other. So some of the teachers of the school have to go to the museum to work as museum educators, and the museum staff, they have to go to the school to work as a common teacher. So they have to swap that way. It's one-to-one. And that's a really strong way to make it, because then they relate on each other and that they depend on each other. They have to be there next Monday to have the 5th grade and this or that. And that really makes them work together and get a very strong outcome of that. And then we try to do the same for the young people. That's more difficult, because when you turn 13, 14 or 15, you don't really care about museums anymore. I don't know why, perhaps it's hormones or whatever, but you're not that much into museums when you're 13. You have so much else going on, but we try to do the same, but that's a long way before we're there, but we are very determined to go there. And we try to make the same partnerships, but I can't say now how that is going to work. And then we've made this homepage where all museums can put their courses and the exhibits out. And so if a teacher is sitting somewhere and say, what shall I do next week or next month with my class, then he or she can log on to this page and say, oh, there's this. That's something about physics and Newton and natural history. I'll do that. And then they can apply for the museum and say, I'll be there this and that Tuesday with 22 students, and we would like to know about this, this, and that. And then the museum can say yes. And then the museum or the school from this page get all the written material, so the teacher can prepare the class to go there. So this is the one platform we have for museum educational thing, and that's really good. And you can see the map of Denmark with all the different areas, the 5 regions. So you can also say, oh, what's in my region on Christian IV, one of our strong kings in ancient times. And that's really good for the teachers, because as a school teacher, you get so many so many people write to you every day and say, please come and see my theater play, and please come and listen to this concert and everything. So making one homepage is very strong for the teachers, because they know this is where we can go, and this is quality, because this is state-funded museums and that has made these things. So I can really recommend, if you can have an e-museum, educational museum, and e-learning, if you can develop a site like that, that's really strong. If this is what I would say is the conclusion on the didactical and educational program we have made, we have to acknowledge and accept the fact that museums, they are knowledge centers, and they are also offering an alternative learning environment, and they constitute a valuable resource in the 21st century. That's without discussion. That's how it is. And we just need to say it and accept it, and get politicians to accept it as well. The strong things about educational programs in museums are that they often are interdisciplinary. That means if you go to, for instance, like the museum I just saw for decorative arts, you also learn something about design processes. If you do it right, you can also learn math. Because how much gold do we need to make this crucifix? How much can the stones weigh? And how do we make the amalgamation to make brass or something like that? So you can make so many interdisciplinary things that strengthen the students, because, as we all know, when we work, we have to cross over between the things we can all the time just to make it through the day. Then it's also very important that you are focused on that the educational programs, they are based on museums' scientific responsibilities and research, because we are the experts in cultural heritage. We are the expert in cultural dissemination and education. And we also have to accept that and try to be proud of that, because we are the expert and the teachers are not. They are experts on didactics and teaching, but we know some other things, and we have to play together. What we also can see in Denmark is that all educational programs are characterized by being very high in scientific standards. And being around the world with this kind of lecture several times, I can see this goes in all the countries I've been. Museum professionals are true professionals. They have set very high standards when they do an exhibit and when they try to do educational programs, because we are so proud of what we do, and this is not only what we do for a living, but it's our life. That's why we work in museums, because it's not a 7-hour day job, it's so much more to work in a museum. So we have so high standards, and we have to be proud of that, because that's one of our strongest assets. And then, as I said before, we also have to remember, if we work together, then two are stronger than one. Now I stay at the Kennedy Hotel, and wasn't it him who said, when he spoke in Berlin in 1960-something, that united we stand and divided we fall? And I think it's the same with museums. We have to stand together and work together, also across the countries, because we can do so many things. That was it. You have time for questions afterwards, so we can also take a break here if you have any questions on this part, because now I'd like to move on to the user surveys, and that's more, much more statistic and going like this. So if you have any questions, please, or you can also wait. It's okay, and I think we have time afterwards for a coffee and a glass of water, so if you really don't care about saying in through a microphone, just catch me in the courtyard. Okay? What we also found out is that we, in the mid-2000s, that we so much lacked statistics. I'm also ahead of Alan said of the libraries and the zoos and the aquariums. And the zoos and the aquariums, they know so much into detail who comes there, how much money they spend, how long time they spend in front of the elephants, in front of the tigers, and when they go to the playground, and what they do. We don't know that in museums. So many museum directors in Denmark, they say, oh, I have 4 displays right now, but I really don't know how much time people spend in each display. And then I say, but how do we know if it works? I don't, I like it. That's what they said 5 years ago. So now we are trying, and we are very focused on having these user surveys. And we have made 3 different ones. We have an annual one for the users. And then we have one we have only done once for the web users, and one for the non-users. And that was quite a difficult one to target the non-users of museums, but I'll get back to that. And what's important for us is to say this is a management tool. A museum is a business like everything else. If you don't make it financially, you'll shut down eventually. That's it. That's how it is. And the more people you get, the more money you get. And the more money you have, the more you can develop, the more you can make projects, the more you can be a stronger part and do it much better. So museum has to be managed like everything else. That means we need strong museum professionals and we need strong museum directors. And from my chair at my agency, I want my directors to be professional, because otherwise someone else can run that museum. It's part of being in a modern society is that you work as a professional. So we are very focused on this one. And I've taken the National User Survey. As I said, we wanted to establish a systematic national overview of the users of the Danish museums. As I showed on one of the previous slides, we have 11 million visitors a year to the 100 museums in Denmark. So that's quite good. Danes go quite a lot to museums. But we didn't know why they went, and when they went, and how often. So that's what we wanted to find out. And as I've written in red, you can find the annual report for 2011 in Spanish, because I went to Mexico a few years ago and then I had it translated, so you can find it there. You can see how we use it. It was too heavy to bring along. But we wanted to qualify the survey and make an ownership to the museums, so all the museum professionals and the board, they could know how to share the museum experiences and include the museum's needs. So we chose an external consultant company to do it. It's just like a survey. Guess you have it as well. Someone call you at night and say, what do you think of this and that? That didn't work. So we make this. I brought it. Yeah. The Spanish one hasn't been printed yet, but we make these. So when you go to a museum, then every 8th or 10th guest will be handed one of these and say, would you please fill one of these out? And a lot of museums say, oh, we have so many old books and postcards, so they will give you a cup of coffee and an old book if you fill this one in. It's 2 pages like this, and if you don't have the time at the museum because you're with your family and you know the kids will run wild, there's this QR code. So you can go home, you can scan this thing, and then you can do it virtually as well. And we hand out about 70,000 of these every year. So it's a quite strong statistics we have. There it is. And what we found out is this. The most common museum user is a woman. She's 52, 53. She's a nurse. She's a teacher. She often brings her husband. She brings her grandchildren, and she's the one who initiates the museum visit. Young people rarely come to museums in Denmark. And 30% of the museum users in Denmark have an academic background. By saying that, you have to know that only 5% of the Danish adult population has got a university degree. That means that the people with high education, they come back and come back and come back. Adults with vocational skills, carpenters, builders, they don't go to museums. So it's a sort of, we're sort of a close community where we usually clap on each other's shoulders and say, oh, we are so good. And then we start to disseminate to ourselves and educate ourselves instead of opening up. But this is thing, we thought it, we thought this must be the picture, but we had never thought it would be so strong and vivid that it's women and they are quite highly educated. And then we also found out that museum visits are social events. How many of you have been to a museum lately where we got one of the, one of the speaker things? Have any of you tried that recently? With the headphones? You go to a museum and then the education thing is you get this headset on where you can't speak to the people you're with. And that's stupid if we can see here that people go to a museum together because they want to share an experience, then we shut them away, out from each other. That's sort of counterproductive in a such way. And then we also found out that users want to be active participators. I think that's due to the internet. That's due to Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, whatever, where you write down to everyone, I'm here now. I thought about it when Alan introduced me, I should have been on my Facebook account to make sure that the whole world knows I'm here. I'll do that afterwards, but that's what we do, to make people know where we are, and then we all like it. More or less in blind, we just like, next day, like. And that's what we do, that's how we show people who we are and what we do. But people want to be active in a museum. Then we did the survey on the web users. Because how do you work with your websites? How many of you have got an active policy for your web pages? No one? You just have it. But we found out that that's the same in Denmark. Many museums direct us things. We need the web page to show when we're open, when we're closed, what we sell in the shop, and where to park. But what we see in the way modern people and young people use the internet is that they can sit in Sri Lanka and be interested in something from the Danish medieval times, and they use the museum's internet pages, the web pages, to know about whatever. Like we do in Denmark, if we want to know something about your pottery or ceramics or prehistory times, we go to the internet and we go to the museum web pages first and say, hey, what works here and what do they have? MoMA has the Museum of Modern Art in New York. They're very strong in using web pages. And I spoke with their development director a few months ago, and he gave me this example of, we have this very large bronze sun chariot from the prehistoric times. It's in our National History Museums. And 70,000 people have been to the web page to see the sun chariot. Then we went into Pinterest and wrote down Sun Chariot Denmark, and we found this young woman. She was from Wales, who had a web page on the Sun Chariot from Denmark. She had 400,000 followers on her page. 400,000 followers following a private person doing her own research on the Sun Chariot. And the National History Museum in Denmark had 70,000 users. Because it was so boring what was written on the National History webpage. It didn't really say anything. And on her page, she developed, the page in history. How did people live? How did the ceremonies do? What had it to do with the Stonehenge thing? And what had to do with everything, the pyramids, whatever? So we have to be vivid. If we want users to use our websites, we have to be there. We have to be active. And we have to know and acknowledge and work after that. The web page is one part of our users, and then we have the physical users. Some people, yes, they go to the webpage to find out when can I go to the museum, but so many people say, no, I can't travel to Chile right now, so I have to satisfy myself with the webpage. So we sort of own them. They deserve to get some proper information. And so many museum directors, they don't focus that, they don't prioritize, say that, because they say there's no money in that. And what my answer to that is, yes, there is, eventually, because if you're interesting enough, then the next time they're traveling, they will say, I have to go and see that museum because their webpage is fantastic. Then the museum must be fantastic as well. But in Denmark, the Danish museums, they are not very strong in this part, and we discuss it a lot, because they say, no money, why should we do it? But we have to focus on web pages, because that's what we do. Don't you all, when you are traveling, start by checking all the web pages and say, what should I see when I go somewhere? Then you take the web pages and that looks boring. The last update was in 2009. Oh, I don't really want to go there. So remember the web page. This is the recommendations I just talked about. The lady there on the right, she is a fictive young woman we developed a few years ago when we had a Danish cultural festival called Golden Days. Now I can't remember her name, but she's from the beginning of the 1800th century. And from the material from some of the museums in Denmark, we created her, and she blogged every day on how she combed her hair and how many dresses she had to change and how difficult it was to know what is called in English, the thing the women wear, as you know, to give them the right figure, a corset. Yeah, how she couldn't breathe when they, tied it when it was too tight. And she was so flirtatious with the male visitor she had because her mom didn't know she was writing them. So remember to flirt, remember to be philosophical, and remember to Facebook when you work on your webpage, because that really works. She had, I think, 200,000 followers the 3 weeks she lived. And it was in front of all the papers. Oh, who is she? Is she real? Or what is it? And she's a pretty young woman as well. So, and we have some, and they saw it was really aesthetic, but we saw her also with the parts of her undergarment and her clothes and what she did and how she changed for evening. And so it was really educational as well, but it was really a very good project. When we did the user survey, as I said before, we found out that young people, they don't come to museums. And we struggled for some time to say, how do we make a non-user survey? Because who are the non-users? Being a non-user means that we don't know anything about them. So we decided to make a survey on why young people don't use museums. And it's very, very simple. They find it boring, and they don't know what to do. It's, as they say, there are only old people there, and I have to be quiet. Do I have to put my hands on the back and walk like this? Or why can't I sit down and talk with my friends? Why isn't there a sofa or anything where I can sit, where I can log on to the web page and tell everyone I'm there? No, you have to walk around and behave. So, from that starting point, I've given Alan and Magdalena 2 copies of the recommendation you have. I think you have some prints, and I'll send them the web pages so you can get that as well, because we've had those in Spanish as well on how we engage young people to the museums. What we found out is that museums must work on 3 levels. There's an institutional level, that the museum must know to build on strategic resource development of the staff. So we have staff that are that are specialized in dealing with young people, because they want so many different things than adults do. So we have to have professionals that know young people, think like young people, and sort of act like young people. We also know that we have to challenge the institutional preconceptions. Being 2 museums mean that you can't create another third, try to attract young people because, oh no, the art gallery, that's so boring, I went there in the 6th grade. So try to do something else. Try to recreate yourself as a new institution. And then try to establish strong partnerships. Even though it's one of the world's most famous museums, and we can't compare with them, a lot of us, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the world's finest decorative arts museum, when they had the new director 10 years ago, they made this Friday clubbing, so where they invited 100 people to go on a disco at V&A, and that was the hottest thing to do in London. If you were on the VIP list to that, you were, it was better than Paris Hilton. And that's from being the most dusty, biggest, largest collection of glass, clay, costumes, silvery, and everything. Was so boring in the old days to go there, because miles and miles of chairs, and I couldn't see any change of them. It was just chairs, and suddenly you had a party in the chairs department. And people went there, oh, I went to the V&A, let's go there next Wednesday to see what the collection is all about. What is it they do? So try to do something else at the institutional level to be hot. After all, it's only items, it's things. They can be not replaced, but you can move them away before they start, dancing in there. Then museums also have to work at the citizen level. They must accept, we think, that they generate new knowledge and they have to be relevant, and they have to relate to everyone's life. And that's going back to museums are for someone and not about something. You have to be relevant. Why do I have to look at this stone axe? What's in it for me? Oh, it's a rock, okay, fine, next. But how have people used it? How was it made? Have they killed anyone? Are there any good deaths? In Denmark, young people are really into skeletons. How did he die? And the more blood we can make, the more they will come. So we have to stimulate the curiosity that young people have before they lose it, as I have. Remember when you were 13, how curious you were, finding your own true values. Is it this way, or is it that way? Should I listen to that music or this music? So use that curiosity, and their imagination to promote their personal reflection and help them to become better people, or at least people who know who they are. Then at the society level, again, as I said a few times now, museums must be aware of their position. They must address the vital problems and possibilities in a contemporary society. And they are the places where we can create a meaningful meeting between different groups. It's sort of neutral to go to a museum. It's no one's place, it's everyone's place. So even though you belong to different groups in society, you can meet there, and you can interact, and you can develop something. And just going to some very practical things that all our questionnaires say that many people don't think about. Remember the basic things. A shop, a cafe, and then I forgot to write down toilet facilities. They have to look nice. They have to be part of the same story. So if you're a contemporary art gallery, you have to have contemporary art books in your shop. You have to have a posh cafe with the right china and the right cakes and the right coffee. And the same if you're a cultural history museum. You have to make one story, and so many museums forget that because, oh, we just get it from somewhere. But you have to have one story. And you have to make the science museum, where do I get in? How do I get out if I don't want to stay there anymore? And you have to remember all the practical informations. You have to also to engage and inform, and you have to focus on the learning potentials. You have to make a lot of QR codes, for instance. You have to give people space to recreate, co-create, co-learn with the things you want to display. The museums in Denmark who have worked for this, after this schedule, they get so much higher visitor rates now than they did before. It's very simple. It's stupid and simple, as they say in America. And it's so close to us, sometimes we just can't see it because, is it just that? I didn't go 7 years to a university for that, for making coffee in another cup, but that, yes, it is very simple sometimes to make people more happy about what you do. So if you take these two parts, how to work with the dissemination and the education, and say we have to focus on our groups and take this into consideration as well, then you can sort of develop and say, okay, I want young boys from the age of 15 to 18, what shall I do to attract them? That's how you can use the educational part and the user surveys and merge these two into the right exhibit for them. And if it don't work, then we have to do something else. But that's the part we can do and try to develop specific exhibits. What we also have to know or be aware of is that people have different learning styles. The American researcher John Falk, he works with these 6 learning styles, and I'm sure you can find yourself in one of them. We have the recharger, that's the top left, who says, I'm visiting the museum to recharge my batteries, and I want to find peace and time for myself. That's why I go to museum. That's the main goal. Then we have the professional or the hobbyist who says, I'm visiting the museum due to a specific professional interest. I'm very much into this or that, and I'm very critical on the way the exhibit has been brought and the academic skills, because I'm sort of a professional. Then we have the tag-along, who says, and that's him, not her, he's the tag-along, say, oh, I'm here because someone else wanted to come. But they are there. And if you can make them an ambassador of your museum, say, I went there because my wife told me to, but it was really good, then you've gained a lot. Then there's the experience seeker who say, oh, I want to experience this museum. And I don't need to see the entire museum. I just went in to see this or that piece. And they want so much more in-depth knowledge than people like me who know I want to see it all. But you have to be aware some people really want just to see one or two things. Then we have the facilitator. That's more or less me, I'm afraid to say, who can guide you through every museum I see. Just I scan the collection, say this and this and that. And that's the part as well who takes on the job as one of the guides in the museum. And they're really annoyed when they are told by the museum staff this is not correct. And then we have the explorer who comes then and say, I'm curious, I'm interested, my mind is open, I'm here because I want to acquire new knowledge. For a lot of museums, they are the best. That's the Sun Chariot, by the way, the thing I talked about. It's solid gold, so it's worth a fortune. So, and we don't know why we have it. We don't know what it used it for, but something with the sun. So it's very interesting. But they are the most. They are the main group for a lot of Danish museum professionals because they are the true museum visitors. But there are not so many of them. Most of us are tag-alongs when we go to a museum because we are part of a group. So we should direct our dissemination and our education for that group as well. So it's sort of these three things you have to take in mind when you develop your museum and try to make a professional institution. This is the 247 recommendations that we found out from 2006 to now that we recommend the Danish museums, or all museums that wants to listen. Now it's you. Say this is how we think you should work. This is how we can see it works if you want to change your museum to become a professional institution where people want to go, like people want to go to the zoo. All over the world, zoos and aquariums are much more popular to go to than museums because they're thought of as being vivid and alive, and a lot of things happens there. But it's the same, more or less, to have a museum and have a zoo. People come to learn, to be educated. So if we can learn something about how they meet the users at the museums, then we get a long way, and we can get much more happy visitors than we have today. You can also sum up how the museums have developed in the 21st century, from being from a what to a why. And that's what I said before. This also shows about the thing about being for someone and not about something. You see, museums are not national anymore. They are global due to the internet, for instance. A museum is not static because the museum is made of all the voices that comes there that relates on Twitter, Facebook, and say, oh, I really like this thing, or this I don't understand. Now this is abusive to me to show these dead people there, these mummies. I don't know why we should have them. So then we start a debate on the internet, and suddenly the museum is alive, it's present, it's there. And most important, it gets pluralistic. It's everyone's voices that gets heard there, and not just the museum professional. And what we have to focus is that I always change priorities ahead. This is an English traffic sign. I think it's fantastic. It tells you that something is happening ahead of you, and I think it's so marvelous. I have it in my office because there are changed priorities ahead. And right here at the end, I would like just to say that sometimes we have to remember Article 27 from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that states that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community. They have the freedom to enjoy the arts and share in scientific advancements and its benefits. The word freely and everyone is very important to me as a museum professional. And I think museums can support this by developing exhibits, educations for everyone to meet the users where they are. And I think it's mandatory for us. It's not something we can do, it's something we must do to take upon us this role to educate the young people, to use the present and the past to show them what the future can be like if we keep behaving the way we do. So it's a strong job we have. We have to focus ourselves and use all the muscles and brains we have to help developing the society by making the museums present and wanted by the society. And I think that's, I would say thank you now for your patience, and it's been interesting to be here so far. Now I don't know if there's any questions right now, or yeah, please feel free. I have to put on this thing so you can speak in Spanish, and if someone will translate it the right way for me. I don't know if anyone has got any questions.
Good morning. I'm Marco Llanena. I'm a specialist in artistic expression, and I will speak very slowly so that the translator can keep pace with me. I would like to know if you have developed a kind of method allowing education to continue in the museum, because one of the major challenges that we have here in the museums nationally is that we have a public and audience that is changing continuously as a result of the systems, and therefore we had a decrease of the school audience, and those who go to the museum run through the hall, and the teachers have a very passive attitude, and we think that one of the key facts in order to be very assertive is to be empathetic with the contents that we're providing in the museum, together with everything that they are receiving as contents in the classrooms, and therefore there is a very important work to develop. We know that we are now adjusting the curriculum in Chile, and we have to consider again what we will do in the future in a way to be more assertive in the classroom. Now my question, have you already developed a kind of job or method that can coordinate what happens inside the classroom in connection with the contents that will be delivered inside a museum? If you are training the people, what we call the facilitators, because beforehand they were called the guides at the museum, but now they refer to them as facilitators.
Thank you. Yes, I wouldn't say that we have sort of a cookbook on how to do it, because it really depends on who the people are. But that's why we are so strong on making partnerships, where each part has to contribute. And for instance, some schools and museums, they have made contracts, really standard contracts, say if the museum spends 50 hours a month or half a year on this school, then the school has to spend 50 hours the other way around. So they sort of meet, and they all spend each the same amount of time and energy in making these partnerships. And then we can also see that the mistake many of us make is that we want to make the classes go through the whole museum, or at least in Denmark, a lot of museums want to. They have to see it all, because it's just equal important. Instead, we have to say, what do we want to see? Oh, is this you want to see? Then we go there, then we stay there, and we say to the pupils, yes, we have a lot of more other departments here. You can come and see them another time, but right now we are focusing on this part. And we stay there, and we make this little part of the museum professional, and the teacher and the facilitator, we call them museum hosts, because they are hosts to the guests. They work together. They have each a part in educating the class. So they have two teachers the time they spend at the museum, whereas in the school they have one teacher. And that's what we can see work, that they co-create the adults that is working there. So be strong on partnerships, be articulate on how you develop your partnerships, because you are there. You also need to get something back from the schools. It's just not the museums giving things to the schools. You have to get some things back as well. There's one there, excuse me.
Good morning. I'm Franklin Troncloso from the Natural History Museum. I would like to know if you have a kind of environmental history museum and you have programs related to this topic in the schools, and which is the role you played and how those museums work in these dynamics.
A lot of the museums, they work with the global warming crisis, or what we call the global warming, and depending on the fields the museum works in their everyday work, they try to make the environmental changes a subject as well. So our geological museum, they focus on what changes, what will happen when the water. Denmark is a very flat country. We don't have any rocks or mountains at all. So if the seas would rise 2 meters, a lot of Denmark will disappear. So what will happen? What will happen to society? And that has happened during the last 3 million years. So we have a lot of ancient villages in the sea just outside of Denmark. So they try to use that as of telling the long story, what will happen when people try to change the environment and how we do stupid things so the environment works. So yes, the environmental issue is a very strong thing in a lot of museums, also in the art galleries, but most of course in the natural history museums, because they have the artifacts. They can find the dinosaurs and the relics and everything and show this is what the world was 2 million years ago. So they are very strong on that. And they try to make it not political but contemporary by addressing the contemporary questions and difficulties we're facing by using history and say, yes, the world is changing. It has always been changing, but now the changes are more rapidly than they've been before. And that's very popular, we can see, especially by the teenagers, because they can relate to that question.
Hello. I would like to know, because many times in the educational department, vis-a-vis the relationships with the audience is separated with the other departments in the museum, and I would like to know how you have succeeded to perceive this in the whole museum and in the way that the displays are set up and how you organize that, how you transmit all of this idea.
That's a very good question, and sorry I haven't come into that before, because that's actually one of the major things we are focusing on, because in Denmark we have, as you said, different departments doing different things in the museum. And when it works, people work together. At the agency where I work, when I get very busy, I do a lot of work, and then just before deadline I say, oh, what about the press? Should we make a press release, and should we do this or that, or what? And then we have to start all over again. And it's the same in museums. If you don't think of dissemination and your users from the very beginning, then I'm sure you won't succeed, because this is what people see, this is what they meet, this is how they meet the museum's research department as well. So if the researchers and the disseminators or the educators, they don't meet and say, this is okay, you're a very clever man, but we have to tell the story that way, otherwise you won't get anyone to stay in there. So you have to make the people work together. You have to make true project groups when you develop a new display or a new exhibit, because everyone then contributes with their field of expertise, and then they do it together. When we have it, like sort of pearls on a string, that the researchers say, okay, this is my research, please make this into an exhibit. Then we're almost guaranteed that it will fail, because that transformation, then we lose some of the most important things in the research. So we have to work together. And when it works, as I see it in Denmark, that's when we have these project groups, and where we have a professional management that says, yes, this is how we're going to work. We have to change the organization so we meet our users by working this way. We have to make this project organization instead of the static one that we used to see in the old days. So this again is a question of management from my point of view. I think if there's no more questions, we should go out in the courtyard and have some fresh air, because I've been standing here and talking and talking and talking. So thank you for now. Thank you for your attention.